everyone. Okay, today we're going to figure out our half rectangle triangles. This is for the Bold Burst Quilt. So I'm starting out with my rectangular pieces. I have 2 in my main fabric color and 2 in my background fabric color. The pattern directions will tell you to pair them up into 2 separate piles. One background with one main and one background with one main. And you want to take this time to separate your patterns into the 2 different piles so you have an even distribution, because we're going to make rectangle triangles that go both directions and you want to have a good variation. So I'm going to start with just one. I like to stack my fabrics. When you're cutting your piles, you can stack up to probably about 4 to 6 depending on how sharp your blade is. So for the first pile, I'm going to cut from the bottom right corner to the upper left corner on the diagonal here. So for that, I will use my ruler and my rotary cutter, line up and slice. Okay, so now I have 4 pieces. And when I alternate, I'll get 2 pairings here. So I have my half and my half. I can flip this one so that they are the same. Just like that. Okay, so this is for the first pile with your angle going from the bottom right to the upper left. Let's cut our other pieces. So again, I have a main fabric and a background fabric. It doesn't matter if the background is placed on top or the main fabric is. You can cut all your background pieces and then all your main pieces and then pair them up. So for this one, I'm going to make my diagonal going the opposite direction. So starting in the bottom left and going to the upper right corner. Okay, so remove my pieces. This gives me triangles that match going the other diagonal. So I'm going to take one of each so you can see the diagonals are opposite. Okay, so we want an even number of each of these directions when we go to build the quilt. So right now, we're going to sew these triangles together, okay? I'll start with this one. What we're gonna do is flip. I always like to flip the side that is closest to the right, so just onto the left side, but you could do it the other way around. So I'm gonna take this, you're gonna line up this long diagonal edge on both, so where they're touching right now is the edge that you're gonna align and sew along with your 1/4 inch seam. So I'm going to flip this over, and this is what it looks like. It's a little bit funky looking. And I'm going to just offset so that I have this bottom point coming out about a 1/4 inch, and same up here, coming out about a 1/4 inch. Okay. So this is ready to go to the machine. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch with a 1/4 inch along this line. So your needle is going to end up starting at about this point here where the 2 intersect, because we're a 1/4 inch over here. So you're going to start there, 1/4 inch all the way down, and you're going to end just at this overhang as well, where these 2 points meet. Okay, so I'm going to stitch this, and then for the same, for this other direction, I'm going to flip the one closest to the right onto the one on the left. I'm going to align the diagonals, and I'm going to offset my points by a 1/4 inch here. Okay, and again, I'm going to sew starting here, 1/4 inch all the way down. Okay, so I'm going to go do that and I'll be right back. Okay, so I have sewn my 2 pieces here. So we had this one like this and this one like this. So you can see my stitch line started just at that edge, that corner where they overlap, 1/4 inch all the way down, and finished on the other side at that same mark. Okay, And same thing for this one. All right, so at this point we're going to press these open. So I like to press with my main bulk of the seam going towards my main fabric. Since I'm using white as my background, it just helps to prevent a lot of the excess. So in order to do that, I'm actually going to flip these over so that the main fabric is up, so that when I press these over and out, the bulk of my seam here is along the back side of my main fabric. So when I press, I like to give a quick little press on the seam to loosen the threads a little bit and make it easier to flip and press out. Okay, you are working with bias edges. The second you cut your triangles, you're working with a bias edge, so it's a little bit more stretchy. So if it helps you to pin your fabrics together before you sew, you also want to be careful not to stretch those edges when you iron. Okay, so then I have the one, and press this out. I kind of give it a little bit of a finger press as I go along. Okay, so we've got our two. You can see they're going opposite directions, no matter which way I flip them, opposite directions. Okay, so now it's time to trim. Right now I have a rectangle that's about 3 3/4 by 7.5 or so. And I want to get these down to 6.5 by 3.5. So for that, I like to use my 6.5-inch square ruler. And get my cutting mat under here once again. Okay. So I am going to trim these both. I'll show you the different directions. Let's start with this one. So there's a couple different key points. What we want to do is when we trim this, we want there to be about 1/8 of an inch of fabric to the side before you actually hit the edge here where your corner will meet. And that'll make sense in a second. But the point is, when you bring over your fabric 1/4 inch, instead of trimming right to the diagonal like you would on a half square triangle, you're leaving enough room so that when you sew your 1/4 inch seams across and down, you're hitting your needle on the actual line. But if you were to offset it, it wouldn't match up. Okay. So I'm going to use a couple different points on this ruler here to make this make sense. The first thing I'm going to do is line up so that my seam here, my diagonal seam, is the cross section here on the ruler at the diagonal corner of 1/4 inch is touching that diagonal line. Okay. So I have the cross section here of my 1/4 inch, and it is touching right at the point of that seam. And I'm also aligning all the way to the left on my fabric. So what I'm going to do now is cut across the top and cut across the bottom here, and any other little dog ears that I have overhanging on this side I'll cut off. So essentially what happens is, because I've set this down 1/4 inch, that's where I know my stitch line is going to go, and it's going to leave an offset of the 1/8 of an inch just above it. Okay, so I'm trimming that. I'm trimming this little dog ear, and now I'm going to come and trim off my bottom. So because I'm using the 6.5-inch ruler, I now know that my height is 6.5 inches because I've just cut my top and my bottom. So now I just need to make sure that my width is 3.5, and I'll be good to go. So you can see when I cut that, and I had, let me show you where that was aligned again a little bit closer. So you can see here that the diagonal line of the stitch is directly meeting up to the point of my 1/4 inch corner markings, which means that this little pink bit that's overset is 1/8 of an inch. So when I remove it, you can see that my corner does not go directly on my stitch line to the edge. It's offset just slightly, okay? And you need that. So at this point, You can either flip it or you can just shift your ruler. I like to shift mine because I like to be cutting off my right side instead of my left side. It feels a little awkward for me. So I am going to set my ruler here, and I'm going to measure over 3.5 inches. This is a 6.5 inch ruler, so I'm going to go over to the marking number 3. And what I'm also looking for is that, again, the 1/4 inch corner marking here aligns on the diagonal of the stitch line, okay? And then I'm going to just trim off my excess here, knowing that I now have a 3.5 by 6.5 inch piece. And I have managed to get my 1/8 of an inch overhang there and there, okay? So this is a finished and trimmed half rectangle triangle, all right? I'll show you how to do it again on this other piece. Because this one is going the opposite direction, it may seem a little bit funny. You're just gonna invert what you were just doing. So I'm going to start here with the 6.5 inch side of my ruler instead of the 1 inch side of my ruler. And I'm still going to align that corner 1/4 inch marking on the diagonal here. I'm going to instead align to my right side instead of my left side. And once I have both of that lined up, I'm going to cut across here and across here. Trim off the top and the bottom. Okay, I have my 1/8 of an inch overhang there. I'm now going to shift over to my 3.5 inch, making sure that my 1/4 inch marking here is aligning straight through the diagonal. And I'm going to now trim off my left side. So you could rotate it if this is uncomfortable for you. It's a little fussy for me, but okay. So there we go. So again, I've got my overhang here, 1/8 of an inch, 1/8 of an inch, and my direction. So there's my 2 trimmed pieces. Repeat for all of the rest of the steps.